Hello, Maker Melissa, Maker Melissa's Lab. In this video I'll be doing another round of upgrades for my Ender 3 and finishing it off this time. I got a MicroSwiss Hot End that I'm going to put on here. I have a SeeMeCNC EZR Extruder. I have a 50/50 fan to replace this one here. And I have the Hero Me adapter for that as well. I have a quieter fan here for inside because it was making a lot of noise. You can actually hear it in my last video. I have a buck converter for that. This goes with the EZR Extruder. I got some connectors because I want to take advantage of the multiple electrical connectors in the power supply rather than making use of a splitter. I have these connectors here because I want to go ahead and replace the connector on my BLTouch because it keeps coming out of there. And I have a magnetic Wham Bam build plate that I'm going to replace this with. Let's get started. First of all, I wanted to give a shout out to Union C77 for mentioning that I should have put the magnets on the underside of here rather than on top like I did. I went ahead and I changed it out there, and I tried printing another benchy, but it really didn't come out much better than the first one here. So then what I was remembering was with my Prusa, I kept having trouble trying to print PLA benchies on the powder coated bed, and so I went ahead and I decided to try PTG, which is what I normally print on powder coated beds, and it actually came out pretty good here. There's a little bit of warping on here, and I think that could have been improved with my slicing profile, and maybe even the MicroSwiss will help with that. We'll find out. Let's start by putting on the Wham Bam bed here. Okay, I've gone ahead and removed the magnets, so now I have this Wham Bam bed here. Next, let's go ahead and install the fan here because that's probably the most annoying thing. The buck converter and these connectors. And let's just get these benchies out of here. And then I don't have to worry about the noise every time I run this. Okay, I've gone ahead and taken this fan out, and since it's such a noisy fan, I just really don't want it anymore, so I'm going to end up using the wiring harness here. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of cut it right here next to the fan and get rid of it. So now the plan is this came with the fan, and there's plenty of wire length to go to where I added the extra buck converter. So I'm going to solder this to the output of the buck converter. I'm going to solder this to the input of the buck converter, and I'm going to go ahead and mount it in there and plug it into the board. Okay, I've gone ahead and adjusted the voltage in there, and I have attached the fan and tested it, and it's working really well. I'm going to use 4 of these 25mm screws. And I'm going to use this as a air intake rather than an exhaust out. Okay, I've gone ahead and attached the fan in there. Okay, for the power supply, I've gone ahead and soldered one of the XT60 connectors and put 2 of the spade connectors on here. I had to make sure I pulled really hard on there because the first one I did on even though it was really flat, it still came off of there. You got to be really careful with the 24 volts and even the 120 in there, just in case the wire comes loose and touches something it shouldn't. I mean, it'd fry all the boards. So I'm going to go ahead and attach this in here. Make sure I unplug it. And the way with these brackets, this little plastic thing comes right off of here, which makes it really handy for me. Okay, I've gone ahead and replaced the BLTouch connector with one of these here. I had to go and snip off the little tab that was on here so that it would fit, and now it's fitting just fine. Now let's go ahead and replace the hot end with the MicroSwiss. Comes in separate pieces here, which in my opinion makes it more fun. And I'll go ahead and assemble that, and then we can start taking apart this. So the way that this works is it uses the existing wiring on here, so it's going to be actually pretty easy. It will involve tightening up the parts of the hot end, such as the nozzle here, with the printer on. Okay, I've gone ahead and attached the MicroSwiss Hot End here, and it's not like super tight or anything, so we're gonna have to turn it on and try tightening it that way. So let's start by loosening that. So we'll go ahead and try tightening it like that, as well as using the socket wrench and the wrench that came with the MicroSwiss. We'll put that there and tighten it against that. So let's go ahead and start by heating it to 250 degrees Celsius. Which requires me attaching the power supply. Right, okay. Let's do that. Oh, I bet I set a limit on the motherboard to not go above 240. That makes sense. Coolio. Probably so it wouldn't burn up the PTFE tube, which tends to like to melt around that temperature. Since there's no fan, actually we could just turn it off and on, and that way we can kind of see what the temperature is. See when it's safe enough to touch.
A little later.
Okay, it is now cooled down to a touchable temperature. So let's go ahead and continue. Let's go ahead and put this on here. We just need to get it cut to length, which is going to be very short. So let's start by cutting a couple centimeters off of here. That's our problem. I'm trying to use a 3mm screw with a 4mm nut. Oh, Oh man, I need a... Okay. New plan. Might work, might not.
A few minutes later.
Okay, I think I finally figured this out. Oh, this is a puzzle. Now, apparently I tried every wrong way.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
Hate this stuff. So let's go ahead and try some of this. Okay, I've gone ahead and attached the multimeter to these two fan wires that I cut so that I can replace it with this. Pretty much yellow and blue do not tell me which one's positive and negative. And I sent the code M106, which will turn on the part cooling fan. If any fan isn't specified, it will choose the part cooling fan, which is what I wanted. And it is showing that basically I have this connected backwards, which means the yellow is ground and the blue is positive. So now I'm going to go ahead and attach this little connector to these two wires, and I'm going to go ahead and swap this out with a connector that goes on here. It has a little hook. The little pins are the same style, so I'm going to go ahead and do that really quick. Okay, I've gone ahead and soldered the wires to this. I put a little heat shrink tubing on. So now the yellow is going to the ground and the blue is going to the positive here. So let's go ahead and try it again here. Let's turn this on. Okay. And let's try turning on the part cooling fan. It is not spinning. It's a really good solder joint, so not sure what's up here. This is puzzling. It's getting 24 volts and in the correct direction. Just not sure what's up here. Okay, so it turns out the way that this fan is wired up is actually backwards of what it should be. So the 24 volts, the plus 24 is on the black wire and the ground is on the red wire, which is not intuitive whatsoever. I went ahead and I switched it around. So if you actually have it wired up backwards, it'll overheat and it won't actually run at all. But if you have it wired up correctly, it'll blow. So I'll show you. Let's go ahead and plug that in. And you can actually go through the menu here, go to fan, set to 255, it'll take a moment, that one will go on, and then this one will actually start blowing here in a second. And you can see it's blowing just fine. So I'm actually really happy about that. And another thing I decided is I actually have these connectors with a little bit better strain relief than I have on here, and the connector itself is a little skinnier, and so it's going to fit better in here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that really quick. I will just pretend that this blue wire is the ground, and it should be easy to go from there. Okay, I've gone ahead and wired it up, and I put all the wires through this nylon cable holder here, and I put some zip ties on here. I went ahead and I moved the little piece from over here to back here to hold the cable in place, and I gave it just enough length so I could go back and forth across here. And I also went through the frame here, and the reason I did that is because when I was going through here, it just felt like the cable was a little too tight and it wasn't at the most extreme distances, like if it was at the top and trying to move the head over here, it just was feeling like there was just too little cable. So I went ahead and I took off the top bar of this, and I had to remove one of these in order to get it through, and I went ahead and realigned it and everything. Now, also to make this so that it didn't kind of go all floppy and just hang there, I put a piece of this black nylon filament in there. It's 2.85 millimeter, and this stuff was actually had a really bad rating on Amazon, but it was only a $10 roll, so I went ahead and got it. So I used it in order to hold this, and I kind of continued along here, and I went all the way over to here. So now I have a nice bowing, and as you lift it up, you can see it just kind of follows the whole contour of the printer, and it looks really nice. So next what I need to do is actually install these springs here, because the ones that come with the Ender 3 are a little bit on the weak side, especially compared to these. If you actually look at them, they're almost like this flat piece of wire that's coiled around, and so the thickness of that flat piece of wire will actually make it so that it has a lot more spring tension on there, and it's going to help with leveling the bed much better. I've also gone ahead off camera, you may have noticed it in the last shot, but I took a piece of steel wool and I roughed this up so that the print would stick better to this. I was actually supposed to do that when I first installed it, but I didn't have a piece of steel wool, and I found one, so I went ahead and did that. I went ahead and I placed the MicroSwiss Hot End cable clip into here, and so that way the PTFE tube will not come out of there. Now, the MicroSwiss Hot End is just a little bit shorter. I went ahead and did a test homing, and it was still a little bit above. So I made for either removing a washer or two out of the little spacers I've added here, or adjusting the value in the firmware or whatever. And I'm going to go ahead and see what needs to be done in order to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and replace the springs now and start leveling it. Okay, I've gone ahead and installed the springs on here, and I have leveled the bed. So what I need to do next is I need to adjust the E-steps on here, because the SeeMeCNC Easy Struder actually has a little bit different sized hobbed gear on it, and I'm going to go ahead and adjust it for that. After that, I'm going to go ahead and place the back on here and put this all together, put the power supply on, and I'll get back to you and we can go ahead and start printing a benchy. Okay, I've gone ahead and now calibrated the E-steps on this. Now, when I went to go do it initially, I had forgotten that you could actually send the M92 code to do it. So I went ahead and I updated the firmware and then uploaded it to this. And the extruder just stopped working no matter what I kept telling it to extrude. So what I ended up finally doing, after playing around with a lot of settings and checking things and everything looked fine, I went ahead and I downloaded the latest version of Marlin 2.0, and I went through and I one by one made sure all my settings were in there and were all correct. There was a few additional ones, so that worked out. Anyway, so I went ahead and I compiled that finally after going through it for probably at least a half hour, and it started working just fine. I also realized I had miscalculated in my E-steps, and it was actually extruding more than it should have because I reversed the two numbers. And so I went ahead and recalculated again, and I used the M92 code in order to set it, and it looked good. I extruded 50 millimeters in, and that's exactly how much went in there, or at least it was close enough to tell with some calipers. And so I went ahead and I saved that in my firmware settings in case I do end up updating it again. And so let's go ahead and print a benchy here. I'm going to go ahead and use the same G-code I had on here for the previous benchy that kept failing on this plate, and hopefully it's going to stick a lot better to this one. And I'll be back once it's done printing. I actually went ahead and printed it, and the hot end got clogged, so I went ahead and I took it all apart and unclogged that. And what I found out was actually a couple of the cables had come disconnected in here, and so fans weren't turning on and stuff. So I got that all fixed. I actually went to go print it again, and it was kind of drooping, and I noticed that the Z-axis was getting a little bit hard to move, so I went ahead and adjusted that and I re-leveled it, and I went to go print it again, and it just kept clogging over and over and over. And what I discovered was this fan was not turning on, so I kept trying to enable it through G-code just because it wasn't. And what I ended up finding was there's a setting in Marlin called E0 Auto Fan Pin, and it's set to -1 by default, which means it's not enabled to automatically turn on the fan. Now I set that to fan pin 1, and it actually will now automatically turn on by itself once the hot end gets to 50 degrees or higher. So I needed to actually put new firmware on here anyways, so I guess that wasn't a completely useless thing that I had to go through and update all the firmware. Anyway, so once I got that going, I went to print it again, and I noticed it was still kind of drooping. And I looked at the screen, and it showed that the part cooling fan, which is the one on here on the side that was like this, it wasn't turning even though it should have been. And so when I pushed it with my finger, it started spinning. So I went ahead and I've ordered a new one of those, because I think when I was taking it apart, it just messed up the rotation on it. It's just not turning very well. It might have been fine if I tried reversing the wiring in the beginning, but I didn't. So I went ahead and I started a print again, and this time when it said that it's supposed to go on, I manually started it with my finger, and it kept going great, and it finished. Let's take that off of here. And this actually looks really, really good. And so I'm actually really happy with this printer. I still need to install a new fan on there when that comes, and other than that, this printer is printing really quietly. It's actually makes me smile when it's printing. The only thing that's kind of loud is the power supply, so I may either replace this with like a Meanwell power supply or just replace the fan inside. I haven't quite decided. Other than that, I'm really happy with this printer and how it's turned out. So thanks for watching. Subscribe if you like this video and you want to see more content like this, and I'll see you in the next video.